Have you ever heard of the House of Stephanus? This was a family associated with the church at Corinth, and the Apostle Paul mentions them as he comes to the conclusion of his first letter to the Corinthians. And he says in chapter 16 and verse 15, "I beseech you, brethren, you know the house of Stephanus, that it is the first fruits of Achaia." In other words, they were the first believers in the whole province of Achaia. He says they have addicted themselves to the ministry of the saints. Now that's the King James. The New King James has changed it to devoted themselves. But the word really has this idea of being set, of being locked in on something, of being totally committed to something. And here was a family who were addicted to the ministry of the saints. And of course, what addicted means is that they couldn't help themselves. They were locked in on something. And there are lots of excuses. There are lots of ways that people can get around ministering to the people of God. You'll notice here they're called saints. And this is a common word for every believer. You don't have to perform miracles and be dead for so long before someone recognizes you as a saint. A saint actually means someone who is set apart for God and his service. And so here's someone who's set apart to serve those who are set apart for God and his service. Now, when I was a young fellow, our family very often traveled out in the summertime 1,500 miles to the western reaches of Ontario, and crossing into Manitoba, we would attend a Bible camp, faith Bible camp up in Lake Winnipeg. After one of those sessions, my father decided we would take the trip back home through the U.S., although we lived in Canada, and we headed down through the state of Wisconsin. We were there on the Lord's Day on Sunday, and my father would always look out small groups that could use some encouragement. And there's a small gathering of believers there, Black River Falls, Wisconsin. And so arrangements were made, and we had a young lady traveling with my sister, and so there were 6 of us, and then there were 2 other visitors that showed up that morning, and I think there were about 6 in the local fellowship that day. And so the man who was announcing the meetings, he said it's just like a conference. We had more than double the population. There was a lady there who invited all of the visitors to her home for lunch that day. We found out when we got there that some months before, there had been a fire in the house and they had lost everything. And they were actually living in a little shed on the property. And this is like a little 2-room shack. And so my sister sat on the organ stool, and I was on a little sewing machine stool, and some other folks were on the sofa, and we just found whatever place we could. And it was evident she hadn't prepared, because she didn't even know we were going to be there, but she brought everything she could imagine out of the fridge, and we all had different plates full of food from whatever it was that she prepared. And, someone, perhaps in a rather unusual act of charity, thinking like, what would you really need if you lost everything in a fire, had donated to them a pump organ. And so it kind of took up more than its share of space in the little shed that they were living in. But my sister, she played the organ, and we had a hymn sing in the afternoon, and I tell you, it was one of the happiest memories of my childhood, because I saw this woman had absolutely every reason not to have us over that day. But she, in her heart, couldn't help it. She was addicted to the ministry of the saints. And as Brother Dave Stifler used to say, in moments of crisis, some people will make an excuse and other people will make an effort. And there are lots of naysayers. There are lots of people you can find who, for one reason or another, aren't willing to help. It may be their favorite TV program's on, or they're just too tired after a day's work. They'll always find reasons not to help. Thank God for the people who are addicted to the ministry of the saints, who are devoted, who are locked in, who say, well, why wouldn't I help? And they find it much easier to say yes than to say no. Now, I know you can overdo it. I know that sometimes you do have to say no. But let's remember that the Lord Jesus went all the way for us. And so the Apostle Paul encourages the Christians in Corinth, who are quite reluctant. Although they're wealthy, they're reluctant to give, and they have to be prompted and encouraged. And he encourages them to remember the house of Stephanas, which ironically means a crown, a laurel wreath that's given to those who excel in one way or another. And so he says, if you're going to go in for something, if you're going to be locked into something, be locked into this. There are lots of people who have a passion about golf or tennis or sports or going out to fine dining restaurants or classic cars, you name it. But thank God for the people who are locked in, who are devoted, who are addicted to the ministry of the saints.